To another Gothamchess recap video. Today we're looking at day 6 between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, and what a day it was. First of all, the drama of the day was the fact that Magnus was barely in his seat. He was like sitting below the chair and everything, and it turned out that he was having terrible back pain, which he suffered yesterday. Not so clear, but that's why that's the name. It didn't seem to affect his chess play though. D4, knight f6 in the first game. And he allows a Nimso, which is sort of weird because yesterday he was defeated in a Nimso in the final Armageddon game. Not really the final Blitz game, but in the final Armageddon game. And this time he comes back with this system of bishop d3 and knight e2, d5 from Hikaru, and after a sequence of exchanges, we have the following position. Maybe I'll just go one more move, castles and bishop a6. So the Nimso is all about black trading off the dark squared bishop and then putting the pawns on this kind of a formation. White's dark squared bishop is nice. It's the only dark squared bishop on the board, but you cannot really move it. That's the problem. And so the only way to mobilize it would be to play something like c4, d5, and big central expansion, while black tries to just develop, put the rooks on d8 and c8, and suppress that from happening. We see bishop b2, so long-term hope of c4, d5. Get knight c6, rook c1, and c4, as planned, takes, and again the idea is to play d5. Here Hikaru plays queen e7, which stops d5 because it defends f6 from the knight, except that it doesn't stop d5 at all, and he can still play it with the following idea: rook e1, an absolutely amazing move from Magnus to start the day, sacrificing a second pawn to hit the queen with the rook, and the knight transfers to this side of the board to attack. Now we get queen d8, and again, how does Magnus create another attacking piece in this position? He plays bishop b1. It's a gangster move. Now he avoids the trade, he's down 2 pawns, but his bishops are snipers from the bottom left, and they're hitting the king side. He's also got long-term intentions of knight f5, knight h5. Hikaru plays b5. The idea of this move is not very obvious. It looks like it doesn't do anything, but it defends the c4 bishop, and you're going to try to play d4. Because if you play d4, you're going to block out the bishop and the queen from the attack, which is exactly what he does, even at the cost of a pawn. Since he's up 2 pawns, he doesn't care about trades. Queen d2, bishop e6, and here's something strange happened. Hikaru had just gone bishop e6 and taken, threatening to take the knight, just to trade it, and it doesn't attack anymore. But here he played a6, stabilizing the pawn on b5. And here, the entire thumbnail of the video, I'm not even going to, pause you and ask you to think, because then you'll all accuse me of being a godmator. Okay, just kidding. But because it's actually the thumbnail and it's already spoiled. A beautiful move here. Knight takes g7, king takes g7, queen g5 check, king h8, and queen h4. A move that on the surface does not attack anything. And this is why this is so brilliant. It looks like it doesn't do anything, and that's the beauty of it. In reality, black has no moves. My former coach, who I worked with when I was trying to climb to Grandmaster, Wojciech Miranda, Polish Grandmaster, used to call these positions time stops, because black, for a move, cannot do anything, it seems. And Hikaru struggled to find a defensive idea. Rook g8, and now we see the whole point. Rook takes c6, because the point is you're trying to remove the guard of this pawn, take with the bishop, protected by the queen, and bishop takes f6. And the bishop, the queen, and this bishop do immense amounts of damage. Rook c6, bishop d4, and king g7. I'm going to show you very quickly what the computer was suggesting here. It wanted rook e8. And Hikaru had said afterward that he thought that after h3, just allowing the king to escape and killing off any back rank tricks, that he thought Magnus was completely winning. And, well, it's a very difficult position after all, but the idea of rook e8 is that if takes, bishop d4, there is the stunning move, bishop f5. So now this is protected 2 times, and the rooks are opened up. So, for example, if we get something like bishop f6, there is always going to be the problem in this position of the back rank for one of the sides. So something like bishop takes, rook takes, takes. Oh, excuse me. Let me back that up. If bishop takes f6, it's not rook takes f6, it's king g8. Sorry about that. And if you play something like queen g5 check, just block. And if you take the queen, I went too fast. Take the queen, you get back rank mated. I spent the entire day looking at it like this, from this perspective, and I did not actually realize that in this position it's going to be king g8. Oh, well, there you go. Mistakes do happen. But we're going to go through this in one take. And for that reason, we got this, and Hikaru tried to run his king, g7 and f8, queen h7, king f8, but unfortunately the pressure was too much. Magnus stabilized, and here made a mistake apparently. He allowed some sort of trades to occur, but the position is still so difficult, and after he brought a few pieces back, Hikaru just found it increasingly difficult to defend his king in the center. Ultimately, this is what occurred. Rook d2, rook e8, and it was right here. Bishop e5 is the killing move, not because it just attacks the rook, but because queen is going to a7, and the queen and the bishop line up on this square. Rook d5, queen a7, and queen c7 checkmate. Magnus Carlsen playing from his knees, immobilized by pain, does not matter, wins the first rapid game, and we have game 2. Game 2 was a long one, and it was a bit of a boring game. It was another Berlin, but this time a different setup from Magnus, much more closed Ruy Lopez. And rather than kind of bog you down here with all the theory, we will kind of slowly maneuver through the middle game. Hikaru plays a4, opens up the a file for his rook. There is a central trade, and the structure is completely identical in terms of pawns. But here, a little bit of an imbalance occurs. B for c, bishop e3, rook a8. A lot of this was equal, but Hikaru had a time advantage. Players were shuffling. I thought there was going to be a repetition. There was no repetition. The first interesting decision, light square bishop is traded for the knight. And we have knight d3, rook c2, knight f4, and Hikaru started stabilizing and getting the endgame to a position where he actually does have something to fight for. Rook knight 5 for rook knight 5, but he's got some threats, and he picks up a pawn on h6, king g7 comes back, and uses his rook and his knight in a very effective way. He trades off the knight on d4. This is supposed to be a draw. Rook a4, and if you take on c6 and you take on b4, 3 on 4 is a draw. It's going to simply be equality. So Hikaru decided that he was going to shuffle a little bit, and here Magnus made a huge mistake. He played king h5, which removes a defender from the f6 pawn, and now it allows rook c2, and you are too slow to defend. So we get this, and now the king begins to run, but this king begins to run too. But this is winning for white. It's winning for white because you are going to get to the base of the pawn chain and start taking stuff. It's winning for white, but it's a little bit tricky. And it was here tragedy struck. Hikaru needed to deal with rook b6. That's the point. Magnus wants to kick the king back, cut it off from the pawns, and use the active king's positioning, and that's actually exactly what happened. Hikaru missed the in-between check, and now all the pawns get traded. What Hikaru should have done was play, instead of rook c3, he actually said this afterward, king e6, and if rook b6, you have king d5. If c4, you have king d5. At the same time, you also have c5 and king g6, with the idea to outflank this way and then deflect the king away from the pawns and take all of them. And I only say that tragedy struck in this moment because there was a massive evaluation shift. Check my watch. Incoming haters saying things about me being biased toward Hikaru in 3, 2, 1. Okay, comment. Boom. And so the players simplified to king versus king, and time for game number 3. So we get game 3. Let's go. Magnus has a chance to put Hikaru away. 1.5 to half. Here we go. Here we go. We have a Berlin, but rook e1, d5, d4, castles, bishop f4, bishop d6, queen f3, and the repetition. I have nothing more to say. We've already seen this from Magnus Carlsen. 2-1 Magnus. It's time for game 4, and we have another Berlin. I know. How many times can you quote me saying we have another Berlin? This one took on a slightly different nature than last time, but Hikaru's got the white pieces. He has to win, so he's trying to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. again, this position and the one from the second game look very, very similar. And so after a4 gets played, you're trying to, again, instigate in the same way. So after rook d8 takes, Hikaru's got to find a way to make some sort of progress on this side of the board. And this was kind of the critical moment, right? So d4, right? d4, and if c takes d4, then something like pawn takes d4 kind of makes it really difficult for white to maneuver here. So Hikaru thought for a while and played the move queen c1, which attacks this and kind of forces Magnus to make this trade. But there was a very interesting idea here that he could have played, and that idea is the breakthrough c4. After something like b takes c4, there is then b5, a stunning move, hitting c6, and the pawn on e5 loses one of its guards, and the e5 pawn is hanging. Those of you that watch the live coverage are going to know what I'm talking about. Those of you that are not are just going to think that I'm referring to a hanging pawn. Chaos could have ensued here, but instead we got queen c1, dc3, and the following position on e5. Hikaru began to route his knights backwards to try to create a pawn break in the position. Remember, he has to win to force the blitz. So bishop c8, rook jumping in fearlessly to the a8 square, bishop f8, rook d1, rook b1, defending the b4 pawn, obviously. That's the whole idea. We have bishop d7, rook a6, and rook a8. Magnus here trying to trade the pieces, but he kind of removes the rook from guarding the center. And in doing that, Hikaru starts creating some play on the other side of the board. He starts to look for knight f3, bishop, all these ideas. Bishop b3 activates his pieces a little bit, puts some pressure. But here Magnus just plays knight d4, and this is a problem. This is a big problem because now white is going to have to trade some pieces. White does not really have a choice. Takes d4, and again, if you take with the knight, there's nothing wrong with this. You just move your bishop, but the position is way too equal. It's way too equal, and you need to win the game to force a playoff. So you've got to play bishop d4, e4, and go for it. You just go f4 and start going for something like e5. So we get bishop g4, e5, and a free pawn taken on d4, counterbalanced with another free pawn on h4. When you are trying to play for a win, you have to win this game to force the blitz. The 5 pawns versus 5 pawns are only counterbalanced by the fact that both sides have different sets of pieces and different things to play for. White has a much weaker king with the advancement of the pawns, but potential weaknesses for black on b5 and c7. Now here, the easiest thing to do is to trade the queen. Offer a queen trade, take on f2, and then try to mobilize with rook c1, hitting this, etc. But Hikaru played rook c1, hitting c7, and Magnus found a really nice idea. Rook d8. The point being that if you play rook c7, here there is rook takes d4, and if queen takes d4, queen e1 check, and the match is over. King h2, right? And he wins. Because, again, at this point, he has a 1-point lead. So rook c1 was met with rook d8, and now we have a problem. We have the fact that there is this, you can't move the rook off the back rank. So Hikaru plays queen c3, and Magnus swoops in, queen g3, threatening queen f4, bishop h3, queen e3, this pawn whenever, and there is too many threats here. After queen takes c7, you cannot take on d4, because then there's queen takes this, queen g8. However, there is an in-between move, rook d7, and that's the problem. That's the problem. Yes, you can give a check, but you cannot prevent all of your pieces from collapsing, and it was here. Rook takes f4, Magnus attacking the rook, threatening check, threatening mates, threatening check, threatening different mates. It was Magnus Carlsen who won the game. Hikaru resigned. A dominant display from Magnus today. It seemed like every game came down to a very, very slight error at the very end, but you can't ask for any better. 4 rapid games, Magnus jumps back, despite spending 90% of his games not even in his seat, but under his chair, sitting in pain, overcoming adversity, and tomorrow we get match 7. There has to be a winner, and tomorrow somebody is going to go home with $140,000. Be crowned the champion of the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour Finals. As always, if you're enjoying your recaps and you're not subbed yet, go ahead and do that. Some more videos are going to appear over there. Been loving reading your comments, so many of them. I think last video had over 600 comments. Maybe we can try to break that today. Much love, and I'll see you after the last recap tomorrow afternoon.